You won't hear from me again. He stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. The unsent message sat there like a loaded gun. Outside, the city screamed in its usual rhythm. Car horns, distant sirens, the endless hum of a world that never sleeps. But inside his apartment, inside his skull, there was a silence so heavy it felt like drowning. His name was Julian, 31 years old, and he was about to vanish. Not die, not leave the country, not start a new life with a fake passport and a beach in Thailand. Something worse, something harder. He was about to delete himself from the feed, from the noise, from the desperate, twitching need for validation that had turned his bones into glass and his blood into caffeine. You know this feeling. You felt it at 2 a.m., staring at your ceiling, your phone still warm in your palm from 3 hours of mindless scrolling. The realization that you've become a ghost in your own life. Present, but not living. Visible, but not seen. Julian had built an existence out of notifications, and now those notifications were eating him alive. He looked around his apartment. The studio was a museum of modern distraction. 3 screens, a gaming chair that had molded to his slouch, empty delivery containers stacked like monuments to convenience. The air smelled like sweat and ozone. On his desk, a journal he hadn't opened in 8 months sat beneath a layer of dust so thick it looked like ash. He was a consultant, or had been. His job was to tell companies how to optimize their efficiency, while his own life was a dumpster fire of procrastination and pornography and poison. He made decent money, enough to keep the distractions flowing, enough to maintain the illusion that he was doing okay. But okay is a trap. Okay is the lukewarm water that boils the frog slowly. And Julian was boiling. The breaking point hadn't been dramatic. No car crash, no diagnosis, no dramatic fighting. It had been a Tuesday, 11:47 a.m. He was in a meeting, half listening to some executive drone on about quarterly projections, when he caught his reflection in his laptop screen. The man looking back at him was a stranger. Hollow eyes, pale skin, a posture that suggested he was already halfway in the grave. He didn't recognize himself, and in that moment, something cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet snap deep in his chest, like a support beam finally giving way after years of silent strain. He closed the laptop. He stood up, and he began to pack. But what he packed wasn't clothes, wasn't passports, wasn't escape. He packed silence, and that's when things started to get dangerous. You think you know what isolation is. You've spent weekends alone. You've gone a day without texting anyone. You've survived a Sunday with a dead phone battery. But you've never disappeared. Not really. Julian didn't just turn off his devices. He amputated them, one by one. The smartphone went first, smashed with a hammer in his kitchen sink at 3 a.m., the screen spiderwebbing like ice breaking on a lake. The sound was final. Belmano, the death of a digital limb. Then the television, unplugged, carried down 3 flights of stairs, left on the curb like a body bag. The gaming console, the tablet, the smartwatch that had been tracking his sleep in broken fragments of anxiety for years. He kept one laptop, but he locked it in a drawer and gave the key to his neighbor with instructions not to return it until June. 6 months, 180 days, 4,320 hours. No input, no news, no porn, no social media validation, no podcasts filling the silence with other people's thoughts, no music to drown out the screaming in his skull. Just him, 4 walls, and the war that was about to begin. Because that's what this was. A war, not a retreat, not a wellness journey with green smoothies and meditation apps. This was psychological combat, and Julian was both the soldier and the battlefield. He called his mother first. She didn't answer. She never answered on the first try anymore, trained by years of spam calls to wait for the voicemail. He left a message. I'm going away for a while. I'm safe. Don't worry. He hung up before he could say more, before he could ask her to talk him out of it. Then his boss. An email this time. Subject line, extended leave. Body, I need 6 months. I'll be back. Don't replace me yet. Send. One friend, Marcus. They'd known each other since college, back when Julian still had dreams that weren't just fantasies of escape. Don't look for me, Julian texted. Then he blocked the number. The apartment was silent now. Truly silent. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your heartbeat, the blood rushing in your ears, the creak of your own joints when you move. It was terrifying, and it was perfect. He walked to the window. The city spread out before him like a circuit board, lights blinking, data flowing, millions of people trapped in the same loop he'd just escaped. He felt a sudden, violent urge to open the drawer, to grab the laptop, to check if anyone had responded to his messages yet. His thumb twitched, reaching for a phone that was now shards of glass in the trash. This was day 1, hour 0, and already the withdrawal was beginning to set in. You don't realize how addicted you are to noise until the noise stops. Your brain, starved of dopamine, starts to eat itself. Julian sat on the floor. He didn't trust himself near the bed yet. Too soft, too tempting. And he waited. For what? For the panic to pass. For the voice in his head, that constant chattering, anxious voice, to run out of things to say. But the voice had plenty to say. It started with questions. What are you doing? This is insane. People will think you're dead. You'll lose your job. You'll lose your friends. You'll disappear and no one will notice. Then accusations. You're running away. You're weak. You can't handle reality, so you're hiding. Then fear. What if something happens? What if you get sick? What if you go crazy? What if? Julian closed his eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, he decided to stop listening. The first night was hell. Not metaphorical hell. Not uncomfortable or challenging. Actual, physical hell. Julian's nervous system, deprived of its usual cocktail of blue light and instant gratification, revolted against him. He shook. He sweated through his sheets. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, convinced that if he didn't check his email right now, something catastrophic would happen. This is the truth about dopamine addiction that nobody talks about. It's not about willpower. It's not about discipline in the Instagram sense, with aesthetic morning routines and matcha lattes. It's chemical warfare. Your brain has been rewired by trillion-dollar algorithms designed to turn you into a clicking, scrolling, consuming zombie. And when you cut the supply, the withdrawal is real. Julian's hands trembled as he wrote in the journal, by candlelight, because he'd removed the smart bulbs that needed apps to function. Just a cheap notebook and a pen. The words were shaky, barely legible. I am not my thoughts. I am not my urges. I am the awareness that watches them. He'd read that somewhere. Seneca, maybe. Or maybe a Reddit post. Didn't matter. It was keeping him alive. At 4 a.m., he almost broke. He found himself standing in the kitchen, staring at the drawer where the laptop sat like a sleeping demon. His fingers brushed the wood. He could feel the pull, magnetic and visceral, the same way a recovering alcoholic smells whiskey across a room. One email. Just one. Just to make sure the world hadn't ended. But he stopped. Not because he was strong, but because he remembered the reflection in the laptop screen. The hollow man. The ghost. And he chose, instead, to suffer. He went back to the floor. He sat cross-legged, back against the wall, and he let the anxiety wash over him like a wave. He didn't fight it. Didn't distract himself from it. He just observed it. The tightness in his chest. The racing thoughts. The conviction that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He watched it all, and slowly, impossibly, it began to shift. Not go away. Never go away completely. But change. The panic became interesting. A phenomenon to study rather than an enemy to defeat. He noticed how it peaked, how it plateaued, how it eventually receded only to be replaced by something else. Exhaustion, then hunger, then a strange, buzzing clarity that felt like waking up from general anesthesia. Daylight crept through the blinds. Julian hadn't slept, but he had survived. He stood up, joints popping, and walked to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror, the same hollow eye stare back. But something was different now. Behind the exhaustion, there was a spark, a defiance. You wanted to know who you are, he whispered to his reflection. Now you're going to find out. He splashed water on his face. The cold shock was brutal and beautiful. He drank from the tap, long and deep. Then he walked to the kitchen and began to prepare his first meal in silence. No podcast playing, no background Netflix, just the sound of the knife on the cutting board, the sizzle of oil in the pan, the steam rising. It was the best meal he'd eaten in years. Week 1 was physical. Julian hadn't realized how soft he'd become. Not just mentally, his body had atrophied in ways that shocked him. He'd thought he was average, maybe slightly out of shape, but functional. He was wrong. He started with basics. Push-ups on the cold floor. His arms shook after 5. He remembered being 12 years old, cranking out 30 without thinking, and the shame of that comparison almost broke him. But he had nothing else to do. No distractions to escape into. No feeds to scroll while he rested between sets. Just the grinding repetition of movement, the burn in his muscles, the ragged breath that sounded too loud in the silent apartment. He ran, not far at first. His lungs felt like they were full of broken glass after 3 blocks. But every day, he forced himself to go 1 block further. Then 2, then a mile. His shoes were old, his form terrible, but he ran like he was being chased. Because he was. Chased by the version of himself that wanted to quit, to turn back, to embrace the warm comfort of mediocrity again. The silence was changing him. Without constant input, his brain began to clear, like a stagnant pond finally flowing again. Thoughts he'd been suppressing for years bubbled to the surface. Memories, regrets, fears he'd drowned in alcohol and endless entertainment. He found himself crying on the 3rd day. Not sobbing, just tears streaming down his face as he sat on the floor, back against the wall, not even sure why he was crying. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was release. Years of unprocessed emotion, finally given space to exist. And that was the hardest part. Not the physical pain, not the boredom, the emotional archaeology. Digging through the layers of himself, uncovering the artifacts of old traumas, old failures, old versions of himself that he buried alive rather than deal with. He wrote it all down, pages and pages. The journal filled with ink, front and back, his handwriting evolving from shaky desperation to steady, deliberate strokes. He wrote letters he'd never sent, confessions he'd never spoken. He mapped his psyche like a cartographer charting hostile territory. 1 entry from day 5. I realize now that I've been afraid of myself my entire life. Afraid of what I'd find if I stopped moving, stopped consuming, stopped performing. And I was right to be afraid. What's here is ugly, but it's mine. The dreams were intense. Vivid, cinematic nightmares that left him gasping in the dark. He dreamed of his phone growing into his hand, the screen becoming his skin, his face becoming a notification badge. He dreamed of being buried in a coffin made of television screens, all playing different shows at maximum volume. He dreamed of his mother, younger, holding him, but when he looked at her face, it was his own face, aged and hollow. He woke from these dreams not relieved but grateful. Even his unconscious mind was purging the poison. But week 1 ended with a test he wasn't prepared for. He was actually running a full mile without stopping, when he saw someone he knew. Sarah, from accounting. She was walking her dog, head down, scrolling through her phone. She didn't see him, camouflaged in his sweat-soaked hoodie and dead-eyed determination. Julian could have said hello, could have broken the silence, just for a moment, just to feel human connection again. It would have been so easy. 1 word. Hey. He kept running, and as he passed her, he felt something shift. A power he hadn't known he possessed. The ability to choose invisibility. To deny the social contract that demanded constant availability, constant performance, constant noise. He ran faster, heart pounding, not from exertion, but from exhilaration. He was becoming something else, something dangerous. The first night was hell. Not metaphorical hell. Not uncomfortable or challenging. Actual physical hell. Julian's nervous system, deprived of its usual cocktail of blue light and instant gratification, revolted against him. He shook. He sweated through his sheets. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, convinced that if he didn't check his email right now, something catastrophic would happen. This is the truth about dopamine addiction that nobody talks about. It's not about willpower. It's not about discipline in the Instagram sense, with aesthetic morning routines and matcha lattes. It's chemical warfare. Your brain has been rewired by trillion-dollar algorithms designed to turn you into a clicking, scrolling, consuming zombie. And when you cut the supply, the withdrawal is real. Julian's hands trembled as he wrote in the journal, by candlelight, because he'd removed the smart bulbs that needed apps to function. Just a cheap notebook and a pen. The words were shaky, barely legible. I am not my thoughts. I'm not my urges. I am the awareness that watches them. He'd read that somewhere. Seneca maybe, or maybe a Reddit post. Didn't matter. It was keeping him alive. At 4 a.m., he almost broke. He found himself standing in the kitchen, staring at the drawer where the laptop sat like a sleeping demon. His fingers brushed the wood. He could feel the pull, magnetic and visceral, the same way a recovering alcoholic smells whiskey across a room. One email, just one, just to make sure the world hadn't ended. But he stopped, not because he was strong, but because he remembered the reflection in the laptop screen, the hollow man, the ghost, and he chose, instead, to suffer. He went back to the floor. He sat cross-legged, back against the wall, and he let the anxiety wash over him like a wave. He didn't fight it, didn't distract himself from it. He just observed it, the tightness in his chest, the racing thoughts, the conviction that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He watched it all, and slowly, impossibly, it began to shift. Not go away, never go away completely, but change. The panic became interesting, a phenomenon to study rather than an enemy to defeat. He noticed how it peaked, how it plateaued, how it eventually receded only to be replaced by something else. Exhaustion, then hunger, then a strange, buzzing clarity that felt like waking up from general anesthesia. Daylight crept through the blinds. Julian hadn't slept, but he had survived. He stood up, joints popping, and walked to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror. The same hollow eye stared back. But something was different now. Behind the exhaustion, there was a spark, a defiance. You wanted to know who you are, he whispered to his reflection. Now you're going to find out. He splashed water on his face. The cold shock was brutal and beautiful. He drank from the tap, long and deep. Then he walked to the kitchen and began to prepare his first meal in silence. No podcast playing, no background Netflix, just the sound of the knife on the cutting board, the sizzle of oil in the pan, the steam rising. It was the best meal he'd eaten in years. Week 1 was physical. Julian hadn't realized how soft he'd become. Not just mentally, his body had atrophied in ways that shocked him. He thought he was average, maybe slightly out of shape, but functional. He was wrong. He started with basics. Push-ups on the cold floor. His arms shook after 5. He remembered being 12 years old, cranking out 30 without thinking, and the shame of that comparison almost broke him. But he had nothing else to do, no distractions to escape into, no feeds to scroll while he rested between sets. Just the grinding repetition of movement, the burn in his muscles, the ragged breath that sounded too loud in the silent apartment. He ran. Not far at first. His lungs felt like they were full of broken glass after 3 blocks. But every day, he forced himself to go 1 block further. Then 2. Then a mile. His shoes were old, his form terrible, but he ran like he was being chased. Because he was. Chased by the version of himself that wanted to quit, to turn back, to embrace the warm comfort of mediocrity again. The silence was changing him. Without constant input, his brain began to clear, like a stagnant pond finally flowing again. Thoughts he'd been suppressing for years bubbled to the surface. Memories, regrets, fears he'd drowned in alcohol and endless entertainment. He found himself crying on the 3rd day, not sobbing, just tears streaming down his face as he sat on the floor, back against the wall, not even sure why he was crying. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was release. Years of unprocessed emotion, finally given space to exist. And that was the hardest part. Not the physical pain, not the boredom, the emotional archaeology. He stopped running. He stopped exercising. For 3 days, he lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, barely eating, barely sleeping. The journal sat untouched. The silence had stopped being a choice and become a prison. This is where most people quit. You've been here. Maybe not in a silent apartment, but in that moment when you realize the goal you've been chasing is hollow, or the identity you've built is just a costume. The temptation to go back, to the job, to the phone, to the familiar pain of distraction is overwhelming. Because at least that pain is familiar. At least that identity exists. Julian almost broke. He found himself at the drawer again, fingering the wood, bargaining with himself. Just a quick check. Just to see if anyone's looking for me. Just to remember that I exist in the world. But something stopped him. Not strength. Not discipline. Anger. It started as a spark in his chest, then grew into a wildfire. He was angry at himself. Angry at the years wasted. Angry at the 1,000 small compromises that had turned him into this ghost. Angry at the algorithmic puppeteers who had turned his attention into a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. He punched the wall. The pain was sharp, immediate, real. He looked at his knuckles, bleeding slightly, and he laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed in weeks, and it sounded like a madman, but it was real. "You're still here," he said to the empty room. "You're still fucking here." That anger became fuel. He started again, but differently this time. Not running to escape, but running to punish. Not writing to reflect, but writing to declare. He began a regimen of brutal honesty, documenting not just his feelings, but his failures. Every lie he'd ever told himself. Every moment of weakness he'd rationalized. Every time he'd chosen comfort over growth. He called it his accountability journal, and it was merciless. Entry from day 12. I told myself I was networking when I was just getting drunk with people I didn't like. I told myself I was relaxing when I was just avoiding the work I knew I needed to do. I told myself I was being nice when I was just being a coward. No more stories. No more excuses. The physical training intensified. He started doing calisthenics in earnest. Pull-ups on the doorframe. He had to repair it twice. Handstand practice against the wall until his shoulders burned. He began fasting. Intermittent at first, then longer stretches. Not for health, but to prove to himself that he could withstand discomfort. That he didn't need to respond to every hunger pang, every craving, every biological urge like a trained animal. He started reading. Not articles, not tweets, books. Physical books he'd bought years ago and never touched. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Nassim Taleb. He read slowly, deliberately, sometimes spending an hour on a single page, turning the ideas over in his mind like stones, feeling their weight. One passage from Meditations stopped him cold. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wrote it on the wall in marker. It was vandalism. It was necessary. And then, in the middle of week 2, he had his first breakthrough. It happened at 3 a.m. Julian had been waking up at this time for days now. His circadian rhythm, freed from blue light and artificial schedules, was finding its natural pattern. He woke up alert, energized, his mind sharp as a blade. He sat up in bed and realized he didn't want to check his phone. The urge was gone. Not diminished, not resisted, gone, like a phantom limb that had finally stopped itching. He got up and walked to the window. The city was different at this hour. Still, honest. The few lights that remained were either essential, hospitals, emergency services, or belonged to others like him, the wakeful ones, the ones who couldn't or wouldn't sleep through their lives. And he felt it, clear thinking. For years, his thoughts had been like a radio with too many stations playing at once, fragmented, overlapping, filled with static. Now there was just one signal, pure, strong. He began to plan, not daydream, not fantasize, plan, with the ruthless precision of a general mapping a campaign. He thought about his finances, really thought about them, not just checked his balance and felt a vague anxiety. He calculated how long his savings would last. He analyzed his spending habits, seeing them clearly for the first time not as treating himself, but as bleeding money into the void. He thought about his career, not the job he'd left, but the work he actually wanted to do, the skills he needed to build, the connections that actually mattered versus the network of digital ghosts he'd accumulated on LinkedIn. He thought about his body, not as something to be shown off on occasion, but as a tool to be sharpened. He designed a training protocol. He researched nutrition, not the fad diet bullshit, but the biochemistry of performance. And he thought about his mind, the most neglected asset of all. He realized that in his old life, he'd been consuming information like junk food, tasty, easy, and ultimately toxic. He needed an information diet as strict as his physical one. High quality, high leverage, no fide. He spent the entire night until the sun rose and filled his apartment with gold, mapping out a new life. Not based on who he thought he should be or who others expected him to be, but on who he actually was when all the noise stopped. He called it the architecture of silence, and it had rules. Rule 1, no input before output. Before he consumed any information, books included, he had to create. Write, train, build, think. Production before consumption. Rule 2, pain is the price of clarity. Every day had to include voluntary discomfort, cold showers, fasting, hard exercise, not to punish himself, but to keep his edge. Rule 3, relationships are investments, not entertainment. No more maintaining connections out of guilt or boredom. Only high-quality interactions. Only mutual growth. Rule 4, wealth is time, not money. The goal wasn't to get rich. It was to buy his freedom, to own his attention, to control his calendar. Rule 5, silence is the default. Speaking was a choice, not a reflex. Presence was power. Mystery was protection. He wrote these on the wall next to the Marcus Aurelius quote. His apartment was becoming a temple, a war room, and then he began the real work. He started with his body. Not just maintenance, but transformation. He researched body weight training like his life depended on it, because it did. He tracked his progress with mathematical precision. Sets, representatives, rest periods. He treated his physique like a project, optimizing for function and discipline rather than aesthetics, though the aesthetics followed naturally. He began to eat like an adult. Not diet, fuel. He learned to cook, really cook, because he had no other option. No delivery apps, no convenience, just raw ingredients and fire. He experimented with fasting protocols, pushing his body to burn fat, to clear his mind, to prove that he was not a slave to his stomach. By week 3, he was unrecognizable physically. The puffiness was gone. The posture corrected itself through strength, not willpower. He moved differently, deliberately, like someone who knew where his body was in space at all times. But the real changes were invisible. By week 4, Julian had developed something that can't be faked: presence. You met people like this, though they're rare. The ones who walk into a room and immediately change the temperature. Not through charisma, not through loud energy, but through the sheer weight of their attention. When they look at you, they really see you. When they speak, every word lands with precision. Julian had become this, but for an audience of one. Himself. He spent hours, actual hours, just sitting. Not meditating in the Instagram sense, with cushions and chimes and guided breathing apps. Just sitting, being, observing the machinery of his mind without trying to control it. And in that space, he began to understand things. Not learn them, understand them. He understood that his entire life had been a reaction, a knee-jerk response to external stimuli. Hunger? Eat. Boredom? Scroll. Lonely? Text. Anxious? Distract. He had never truly chosen anything. He had just responded. Now, in the silence, he learned to sit with the urge without acting on it, to watch the desire rise and fall like a wave. And in that gap between stimulus and response, he found freedom, the only freedom that matters. He started to see the patterns. How his desire to check his phone was actually a desire for connection, which was actually a fear of his own thoughts. How his spending on convenience was actually a lack of respect for his own time. How his relaxation was actually just low-grade anxiety wearing a disguise. He wrote it all down. The insights came fast and furious now, like he'd tapped into a vein of truth that had been buried under years of sediment. One entry from day 26. I realized that discipline isn't punishment. It's the highest form of self-respect. Every time I choose the hard thing, the cold shower, the extra set, the hunger, the silence, I am voting for the person I want to become. Every time I choose comfort, I vote for the person I was. The election happens daily. The majority wins. He began to train his mind like he'd trained his body. mental arithmetic to keep his cognitive function sharp, memory exercises, memorizing long passages of text, the order of a deck of cards. He practiced focus by watching a candle flame for an hour without looking away. At first, his mind screamed at him, wandered endlessly, but slowly, he developed the muscle of attention. And with that attention came power. He could read a dense book in one sitting, retaining every detail. He could analyze complex problems without getting overwhelmed. He could see the underlying structures of things, the economic incentives, the psychological triggers, the power dynamics that had been invisible to him before. He started to think about wealth differently, not as money, but as optionality, not as consumption, but as creation. He realized that the average person's financial life was just another form of distraction, earning to spend, spending to fill a void, filling the void to avoid thinking about the void. He sketched out a new financial model: extreme savings, aggressive investment in skills, building assets instead of buying liabilities. Not to get rich, but to buy his freedom. To never again be in a position where he had to tolerate a meeting he didn't care about because he needed the paycheck. But this wasn't greed. This was survival. And then came the test he didn't expect. Someone knocked on his door. It was day 31. 1 month of silence. 1 month of transformation. Julian had been in the middle of a handstand, holding the position against the wall, blood rushing to his head when the sound came. 3 sharp raps. Insistent. His heart rate, already elevated, spiked. No one knocked on his door. He'd cut off the world so completely that he'd started to believe he was invisible, untouchable. Another knock. Then a voice. "Julian? It's Marcus. Open up." Marcus. His friend. The one he'd texted before disappearing. The last connection to his old life. Julian came down from the handstand, feet hitting the floor softly. He stood there, breathing, considering. He could open the door, break the silence, just for a moment, explain himself, let someone witness his transformation. Or he could remain silent. He chose silence. "Julian, I know you're in there. Your car is outside. Your mail is piling up. Your mom is worried sick. Open the fucking door." The voice was different from the silence. Harsh, demanding. It felt like an assault, like Marcus was trying to drag him back into the world of noise and obligation. Julian walked to the door, put his hand on the wood. He could feel Marcus on the other side, the heat of his body, the weight of his concern. "I'm fine," Julian said. His voice sounded strange to him, deeper, slower, like it had rusted from disuse. "Fine, you disappear for a month, and you're fine? Open the door. Let's talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Bullshit. You're having a breakdown. You're depressed. Let me in, man. Let me help you." Julian closed his eyes. He could see the trap, the well-meaning trap of concern that was actually just a demand for him to return his old patterns, to be visible again, to be available, to perform his friendship, his normalcy, his sanity for an audience. "I'm working," Julian said. "Working? On what? On going crazy?" "Julian, this isn't healthy. Isolation isn't." "Goodbye, Marcus." Julian stepped back from the door, waited. "Julian? Julian, open this fucking door." The knocking became pounding, then shouting, then silence. Footsteps retreating, a car starting, driving away. Julian stood there for a long time, hand still on the door. He felt nothing. No guilt, no loneliness, just clarity. Marcus wasn't wrong. Isolation wasn't healthy for most people. But Julian wasn't isolating. He was incubating. And you don't crack the egg to check if the chick is okay. He walked back to his training area. He picked up where he'd left off. But something had shifted. The outside world knew he was here now. The secret was out. The pressure would increase. He had to be ready. He doubled down, extended his fasts, increased his training volume, deepened his study. He read Seneca's letters until he could recite them. He analyzed the Stoic concept of negative visualization, premeditatio malorum, not to create anxiety, but to inoculate himself against fear. He imagined losing everything: his money, his health, his mind, his life. He sat with these possibilities until they lost their power over him, until he could say, with complete honesty, that he was prepared for any outcome. And in that preparation, he found a strange peace. Not happiness. Happiness was a fleeting emotion, unreliable and childish. But eudaimonia, flourishing, the sense that he was living exactly as he was meant to live. He began to understand what wealth truly meant. It wasn't the accumulation of stuff. It was the elimination of need. The fewer things he needed, the richer he became. He needed no validation, no entertainment, no comfort, just the basics: food, water, movement, thought. By week 5, he was spending less than $10 a day, and he felt wealthier than he ever had, making 6 figures. But the real test was still ahead, the return, because eventually he would have to leave this sanctuary, and he had to ensure that when he did, he wouldn't slip back into his old patterns. He had to become the kind of man who could survive in the noise without being the halfway point. Day 45. Julien stood naked in front of his bathroom mirror. Not vanity, inventory. He assessed his body like a machine. The fat was gone, replaced by lean muscle earned through hundreds of hours of bodyweight training. The skin was tighter. The eyes were different, not just clearer, but harder. The softness of indecision had been burned away, but the physical changes were the least of it. He had read 30 books, not skimmed, studied, annotated, absorbed, from philosophy to finance to human psychology. He had filled 3 journals with his thoughts, his plans, his confessions. He had meditated, not the app-guided kind, but the brutal practice of sitting with his own mind for over 100 hours. He had conquered, if not all his demons, then at least his addictions. The urge to check a phone was a distant memory, like a childhood illness. The need for external validation had been replaced by an internal standard so high that no external opinion could touch it. He was, for the first time in his life, autonomous. And he was terrified, because now he had to decide what came next. The disappearance had been an escape, yes, but also a cocoon. He couldn't stay here forever. The money would run out eventually. The world would demand his return. But how to return without being consumed? He spent 3 days planning his reentry. Not just the logistics, but the philosophy. He would not go back to his old job. That was certain. He would not reactivate his social media. He would not resume his old relationships at their previous intensity. He would not fall back into the patterns of consumption and distraction. But he had to make a living. He had to interact with the world. He had to exist in the digital age without being devoured by it. He designed a system, rigid, uncompromising. First, income. He would consult, but differently. High value, short-term engagements. No full-time employment. No meetings that could be emails. No office politics. He would charge enough to work less, not more. He would optimize for freedom, not status. Second, communication. A flip phone for emergencies only. No smartphone. Email checked once per day. At 4 p.m. for exactly 30 minutes. No exceptions. The world would wait for him. He would not wait for the world. Third, relationships. Ruthless curation. He would maintain contact with exactly 5 people. His mother, 2 mentors, 2 peers who elevated him. Everyone else would receive polite distance. He would not explain himself. He would not apologize for his absence. Fourth, input. No news. No social media. No television. Books only. Physical books. High density. High leverage. Fifth, maintenance. The training would continue. The silence would continue, not as isolation, but as practice. 2 hours every morning before the world woke up, he would be alone with his thoughts. No matter what. He called it the protocol, and it was non-negotiable. But there was one more thing. The most important thing. He had to decide who he was now. Not what he did. Who he was. The old Julien was dead. The ghost was gone. But what replaced him? He looked in the mirror again and spoke to his reflection. You are the blade and the whetstone. You are the student and the teacher. You need nothing, want nothing, fear nothing. You create value. You do not consume it. You are the silence and the noise. It sounded dramatic. It sounded true. He began to prepare for his return. He bought new clothes, not the trendy, uncomfortable costumes of his old life, but simple, functional garments. Black, gray, navy. Nothing with logos. Nothing that made a statement except, this man is not trying to impress you. He trimmed his hair himself, with military precision. He shaped his beard, not for fashion, but for function. He looked severe, appropriate, and he practiced speaking. After 45 days of near-total silence, his voice had become a whisper. He read aloud for an hour each day, rebuilding the muscle. Not to be louder, but to be precise. Every word would count. No fide, no umps and ahs. Speech is a weapon, not a habit. Finally, day 60 approached. 2 months, the end of his disappearance. But he wouldn't announce his return. No grand re-entry. No, I'm back post. He would simply appear, silent, changed, unrecognizable to those who had known him before. He was ready, or so he thought. The return began with a coffee shop. Not just any coffee shop, the one 3 blocks from his old office, where he used to stand in line every morning, staring at his phone, consuming his overpriced latte while answering emails before his brain had even fully booted up. He walked in on day 61. The sound hit him first. The music, the steam wands, the chatter, the notifications pinging from a dozen pockets. It was overwhelming, painful almost. His newly sensitive nervous system recoiled. But he didn't show it. He stood in line. He didn't take out a phone. He didn't have one. He just stood there, present, observing. The barista was new. Young. She smiled at him. What can I get you? Black coffee. Large. That's it. That's it. She seemed surprised. Everyone else ordered elaborate concoctions with modifications and substitutions, performing their complexity for the world. He just wanted caffeine. He paid with cash. He'd stopped using cards, another link to the digital surveillance state severed, and took his coffee to a corner table. He sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. Old habits, new reasons. And he watched. The shop was a zoo of distracted primates. Every person hunched over a screen. Couples sitting together, both scrolling. A businessman on a video call, speaking too loudly, performing his importance. A teenager taking photos of her drink, adjusting the angle, applying filters, living for the likes of strangers. Julian felt a profound sadness. Not superiority. He had been these people 2 months ago, but sadness that they didn't know what he knew. That they were trapped in a prison they couldn't see, wasting the only resource that mattered, their attention. He sipped his coffee. It tasted better than anything he'd had in the silence. The contrast made it sweeter. And then he saw her. Sarah, from accounting, the woman he'd passed on his run, what felt like a lifetime ago. She was at the counter, ordering her usual. He remembered some sugar-free vanilla nonsense. And she looked exactly the same. Not just physically, but energetically. The same harried expression, the same phone in her hand, the same aura of low-grade panic. She turned, coffee in hand, and saw him. Her eyes widened. She walked over. Julian? Oh my God, Julian, where have you been? Everyone's been talking about you. Marcus said you went crazy or something. Locked yourself in your apartment. Are you okay? He looked at her. Really looked. He saw the concern in her eyes was real, but also something else. Curiosity, hunger for drama, the need to be the one with the news. I'm well, he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the shop. People nearby turned slightly, unconsciously. Well, that's it. You disappear for 2 months, and you're well. We thought you were dead. Your job is gone, you know. They replaced you. Your mom is. Thank you for your concern. He said it without emotion. Not cold, exactly. Just final. A closed door. Sarah blinked. She didn't know how to respond to this. In the old days, Julian would have apologized, would have explained, would have performed his normalcy to make her comfortable. Not anymore. Okay. Well, welcome back, I guess. She hovered, waiting for more, then retreated when it didn't come. Julian watched her go. He felt no victory, just clarity. He had passed the first test. He could interact with his old world without being pulled back into it. But the real challenge was coming. He opened his laptop for the first time in 2 months. Not the one in the drawer that was still locked away. A new one, wiped clean, no bookmarks, no saved passwords, no digital trail. He opened a browser and began to rebuild his income. Not as an employee, as a sovereign individual. He drafted an email to his old network. Not the social network, but the professional one. Short, direct, I'm available for strategic consulting. High value. Limited availability. Reply with your problem, not your proposal. He sent it to 10 people. Not 100. 10. Curated. High leverage. Then he closed the laptop. He wouldn't check it until tomorrow at 4 p.m. He finished his coffee. He walked out into the city. And for the first time, he felt truly free. Not because he had escaped the world, but because he had mastered himself enough to exist within it without being consumed. But freedom, he knew, was a daily practice. And the world would not give up on trying to reclaim him. Week 10, the reintegration. Julien moved through the world like a ghost in reverse. Where before he had been a ghost, present but not living. Now he was fully alive but partially invisible. He spoke when necessary, engaged when profitable, existed in the digital realm only as a utility, never as a participant. The results were immediate and startling. 3 of his 10 emails had generated serious interest. High-value contracts, remote work, terms he dictated rather than accepted. He negotiated from a position of absolute detachment, the ultimate power position. He didn't need the money. He didn't need the validation. He could walk away from any deal, and they could smell it on him. They paid his rates, double his old salary for half the hours. He worked 2 days a week. The rest of the time was his. Training, reading, thinking, being. His apartment, once a prison of distraction, had become a fortress of solitude. He'd removed the television completely. The furniture was minimal: a bed, a desk, a training mat, bookshelves, white walls. No art, no clutter, nothing to pull his attention. He ate the same meals, rotated on a schedule. Nutrition optimized, decision fatigue eliminated. He wore the same outfit, variations of black and gray. His identity was not in his consumption, but in his creation. And people noticed, but couldn't understand. Marcus tried to reconnect, showed up at the coffee shop waiting. Julien sat with him for exactly 30 minutes. Listen to Marcus talk about his life, the drama at work, the dating apps, the Netflix shows, the political outrage. It was like listening to a language he'd once spoken, but now found childish. "You've changed," Marcus said finally. "You're like cold now, robotic." "No," Julien said. "I'm just not performing anymore. I used to laugh at your jokes whether they were funny or not. I used to agree with your complaints whether they were valid or not. I used to be available whenever you called because I was afraid of being alone. I'm not afraid anymore. So what? You're too good for me now. Too good for the version of me that needed you to validate his existence. I still value you, but I don't need you. There's a difference." Marcus left angry. Julien let him go. Some relationships could only exist in the space of mutual neediness. When one person grew out of that space, the relationship either evolved or died. He was at peace with either outcome. The same happened with his family. His mother called. He answered once a week, Sundays at 2 p.m. for exactly 15 minutes. He loved her. He was present with her. But he didn't absorb her anxiety, her worries, her need for him to be the son she remembered. He was the man he had become. She could accept it or not. She didn't understand, but she sensed a change. "You're stronger," she said one Sunday. "I don't know what happened to you, but you're not the same boy who left." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." But the greatest test came in week 11. An offer. The offer. His old company, the one he'd abandoned, the one that had replaced him, wanted him back. Not as a consultant, as a director, a seat on the board, stock options, a corner office, status, power, the ability to make real change from the inside. It was everything his old self had ever wanted. He met with the CEO, a man he'd once feared, once performed for, once needed approval from. They met in that corner office, the one with the view Julien had once dreamed of. "We missed you," the CEO said. "You had potential. You just needed to get your head right. And clearly you have. Whatever sabbatical you took, it worked. You're sharp, focused, different." Julien looked at the view. The city spread out below, all those people trapped in their loops, all that energy being harvested by companies like this one. He could help them optimize it. He could be well paid to do so. He could have the status, the comfort, the identity. "No," he said. The CEO blinked. No, I don't want your office. I don't want your stock. I don't want to optimize your quarterly earnings. I don't need your validation, your status, or your fear. I create value now. I don't extract it. Goodbye." He walked out, and as the elevator descended, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph, not anger, pity. Pity for the man in the corner office who had everything Julian once wanted and was still trapped, still hungry, still performing, still empty. Week 12, the final phase. Julian had been back in the world for 6 weeks, but he had never truly returned. He orbited society like a distant moon, present, influential, but never touching down. He worked his contracts, delivered massive value, collected his fees. He maintained his protocol with religious intensity, but he knew the danger wasn't past. The danger was that he would become comfortable, that this new identity would harden into just another mask, that he would start to identify as the disciplined man, the stoic, the one who disappeared, and become trapped in that performance just as he'd been trapped in the old one. So he decided to disappear again, not from the world, but from himself. He began a new practice. Every day, he would destroy something he had built, a belief he'd clung to, a habit he'd perfected, a rule he'd followed. He would hold it up, examine it, and if it no longer served truth, he would let it go. He stopped the calisthenics protocol he'd been following religiously. Not stop training, just stop following someone else's program. He designed his own. Then he stopped following that and trained intuitively, listening to his body rather than his plan. He questioned the Stoics, not rejected them, questioned them. Was their acceptance of fate just a rationalization for passivity? Was their suppression of emotion just another form of repression? He read the critics, Nietzsche, the hedonists, the existentialists. He didn't agree, but he listened. He questioned his minimalism. Was his empty apartment just another form of aesthetic? Was his black clothing just another uniform? He added color, then removed it, then added it again. He refused to let his identity become static. And he questioned his silence. Not the digital silence, that was permanent, but his emotional silence, his refusal to connect deeply with others. Was this strength, or was it just fear? Had he built walls so high that nothing could get in, including love? He experimented. He met a woman, not on an app. He refused those, but in the library, where he went to read physical books. She was reading Marcus Aurelius. He didn't mention that he could recite it. He just asked her what she thought. "It makes me feel less alone," she said. "Like someone else gets it." Gets what? The weight of being alive, of having to be strong all the time. He looked at her, really looked, and he saw not a distraction, not a temptation away from his path, but a fellow traveler, someone else fighting the same war. They talked for hours, then days. He broke his protocol for her. Not the important parts, not the discipline or the silence or the focus, but the isolation. He let her in, slowly, carefully, but truly. Her name was Elena. She was a surgeon. She understood pressure, understood the need to perform, the cost of perfection, the loneliness of competence. She didn't need him to be strong all the time. She didn't need him to perform. For the first time, Julian allowed himself to be seen. Fully. Not just the disciplined facade, but the doubt, the fear, the vulnerability that he had been suppressing for months. And nothing collapsed. He didn't lose his power by sharing it. He didn't lose his focus by connecting. If anything, he became sharper, because now he had something to protect that was bigger than himself. But he didn't lose himself in her. That was the trap he avoided. He maintained his solitude, his practice, his standards. He simply added her to his life as an ally, not an addiction. Together, they were more than they were apart, but they were still whole alone. This was the final lesson, the one he almost missed in his quest for self-sufficiency. That man is not meant to be an island, but he must be a fortress with a gate, not a city with open borders. Day 90 approached. 3 months since his return. 6 months since he had smashed his phone and begun this transformation. He was ready for the final phase. Day 100, the centurial mark. Julian woke up before dawn, as always. Elena slept beside him. She stayed over on weekends, respecting his need for solitude during the work week. He watched her breathe for a moment, not with possession, but with appreciation. Then he rose. He went to his desk. He opened his journal, the fifth one he'd filled since beginning this journey. He wrote the date. Then he wrote a single question. Have I become the man I needed to be? He stared at the question for a long time. The answer was complex. He had conquered his addictions, mastered his attention, built a body that served his will, created income that bought his freedom, cultivated a mind that could cut through illusion, found a partner who complemented without completing him. But the work was not done. It would never be done. That was the secret. There was no finish line, no state of arrived, just a daily practice. The eternal return of choosing the hard thing, the true thing, the disciplined thing, again and again, until the end of his days. He closed the journal. He looked around his apartment. It was no longer a cocoon. It was a launch pad. He had spent 6 months becoming. Now it was time to build. Not wealth for wealth's sake. Not status. Not comfort. But legacy. Impact. The kind of value that outlasted the creator. He began to write. Not in his journal this time, but for others. A manifesto. A guide. Not for everyone. Most people weren't ready for this. But for the few. The ones like him, staring at their ceilings at 2 a.m., knowing they were meant for more, but trapped in the amber of distraction. He wrote about the silence, about the withdrawal, about the war. He wrote without pity, without apology, without the softening that makes palatable lies. He wrote the truth, sharp and cold as a winter morning. The world will not save you, he wrote. No app, no drug, no purchase, no relationship will fill the void you feel. The void is not meant to be filled. It is meant to be entered, walked through, transcended. You must become the kind of person who does not need saving, who is not looking for rescue, but for the next battle, the next test, the next opportunity to choose who you are over who you feel like being. He wrote for 6 hours straight. When he finished, he had 30 pages. He would publish it anonymously. Let the words stand on their own. Let them find who they needed to find. He stood up. He went to the window. The city was waking up, millions of people beginning their daily performance, unaware that everything they were chasing was dust. He felt no superiority, only responsibility. He had escaped the cave. He had seen the sun. Now he had to decide. Would he go back and try to drag others out, knowing most would fight him? Or would he enjoy his freedom in silence? He would do both, in his way, through his work, through his example, through the power of his presence. He dressed in his simple clothes. He prepared his simple meal. He trained his body through its paces until it glistened with sweat and his mind was sharp as a scalpel. Then he sat in silence. Not the desperate silence of the addict, not the enforced silence of the prisoner, but the powerful silence of the sovereign. The silence of someone who could speak at any moment, but chooses not to, who could engage with the noise, but chooses the signal. Elena woke up. She found him sitting there, cross-legged, eyes closed. She didn't disturb him. She recognized the posture, the battle stance. She made her own coffee and sat in the other room, reading, giving him space. This was love, he thought. Not fusion, but parallel play. Two sovereign beings choosing to walk together. He opened his eyes. The morning sun filled the room. He stood up. He kissed her forehead. I have to go, he said. Where? To work, but first to walk, to think, to be. Will you be back? He smiled. Not the performative smile of his old life, but something real, something earned. Always, but never the same. He walked out into the city, into the noise, into the world he had disappeared from and returned to and would eventually leave again. But this time he was ready, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that the man he was becoming would never stop becoming. 6 months, 180 days. The circle closed. Julian stood in the same apartment where he had shattered his phone, but everything had changed. The walls were no longer closing in. They were expanding outward, containing a universe of possibility. The silence was no longer a weapon against himself, but a shield protecting his essence. He looked at his reflection one last time. Not the hollow man he'd seen 6 months ago. Not the angry man of the withdrawal phase. Not the rigid man of the early discipline, but someone integrated, Whole, fluid and solid at once. He picked up his jacket, a simple, well-made thing. He walked out the door, down the stairs, into the street. The city received him like any other day, but he was not any other man. He walked to the park. He sat on a bench. He watched the people pass by, each trapped in their own loops, each carrying the potential for transformation they didn't know they possessed. A young man sat down next to him, early 20s, eyes glued to a phone, thumbs scrolling endlessly. Julian recognized the posture, the addiction, the quiet desperation. The young man looked up, caught Julian's gaze. Something passed between them. Recognition, not of identity, but of possibility. "You look peaceful," the young man said. It was strange, talking to strangers in this city, but Julian had that effect now. He invited confidences without trying. "I am," Julian said. "How?" "I mean, sorry, that's weird. But you look like you figured something out. Like you're not running." Julian considered. This was the test. Could he transmit what he'd learned without diluting it? Without turning it into the same motivational pablum that had failed him for years? "I stopped running," Julian said. "I sat down. I turned everything off. I waited for the panic to pass. And then I built something new from the wreckage." "That sounds lonely," the young man said. "It is. At first. Then it's just true." The young man looked at his phone, then back at Julian. "I don't think I could do that. Disappear. Everyone needs me. My job, my friends, my everyone." "They don't," Julian said. "They want you present, available, distracted. They want your attention because they don't value their own. But they don't need you, and you don't need them. Not in the way you think. That's dark, man. That's freedom. Most people will never taste it. They'll die having never met themselves. Don't be most people." The young man stared at him, processing. Julian stood up. He had said enough. Too much, perhaps. The truth didn't need to be pretty. It just needed to be true. He walked away. He didn't look back. Whether the young man followed his advice or went back to scrolling didn't matter. Julian had planted the seed. That was all he could do. He walked through the city, invisible despite his presence. He passed his old office building. He could go in, take that corner office, accept that power. But he kept walking. Some games weren't worth winning. He passed the coffee shop where Sarah had confronted him. He didn't go in. He didn't need the coffee. He didn't need the ritual. He kept walking, to the edge of the city, to where the buildings thinned and the horizon opened up. He had disappeared to find himself. He had returned to test himself. And now he would continue, not as a ghost, not as a guru, but as a man who had chosen discipline over comfort, silence over noise, creation over consumption. He thought about the next 6 months, the next year, the next decade. He had plans, yes, ambitions, but they were different now, not driven by fear or lack or the need to prove, just expression, the natural outpouring of a full cup. Elena was waiting for him at a restaurant nearby, a celebration, though they didn't need a reason. He would sit with her, present, undivided, whole. Then he would return to his apartment, to his silence, to his work. This was the life he had built. Not easy, not comfortable, but true. He turned back toward the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors no screen could replicate. He took a deep breath. He began to walk, and as he walked, he smiled, because he knew the secret now. The secret was that there was no end, no destination, just a path, just the choice, made fresh every morning, to be the man he had decided to be. No noise, no explanation, no performance, just presence, just power, just the silence that speaks. You think you know how this story ends? With success, with money, with a book deal, or a viral moment, or some proof that the pain was worth it. But you're still thinking like the old Julian, still measuring value in external validation. Here is the truth. The man who disappeared for 6 months didn't come back to conquer the world. He came back to stop needing it. He sits in his apartment now, as I write this. The sun has set. Elena has gone home. The city hums below, millions of people chasing their tails, and he is not a millionaire, not a guru, not an influencer with a perfect morning routine to sell you. He is simply free, and freedom looks like nothing special to the outside world. It looks like a small apartment, like simple meals, like early mornings and sore muscles and the quiet confidence of a man who needs no one's permission to exist. You want to know what he does now? He wakes up. He trains. He works on problems that interest him. He reads. He writes. He spends time with the few people who matter. He sleeps. That's it. No climax. No montage. No moment where the music moment where the music swells and the crowd cheers. Just a daily practice of being fully alive. And that, he discovered, is enough. More than enough. It's everything. You've been waiting for the call to action, the button to click, the course to buy, the method to follow. There is none. If you've watched this far, you don't need more information. You need less. You don't need to be motivated. You need to be left alone with yourself long enough to face what you've been avoiding. So here is your only instruction. Stop watching. Turn this off. Sit in the silence. And don't get up until you're done being who you are and ready to become who you could be. The world will wait. It always does. But you won't. Not if you start now. Not if you choose today to disappear.